Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. In this episode we'll look at logging, which is a really important part of building applications. As we saw in previous, although not talking about it, when looking at the console we see logs already provided out of the box by ASP.NET. So in this episode we'll see how we add our own logs to the application. So let's get to it. So we have our application. If you notice, we already have some messages here, but we are not really using logging. If you remember when we created this, not here, the dependency injection episode, we added this decorator that just console write line this information, but this isn't really logging, because logging maybe to the console as we are seeing, but maybe to other providers like consoles, or to an external like an Elasticsearch server. So then we can check out the logs in Kibana or stuff like that. So console write line isn't really good, and doesn't have that log levels that we are used to error warning, stuff like that. So let's improve this with real logging. So out of the box there are some providers configured, and we can configure more, but out of the box I opened this already. This is that create default builder we have seen in the past, that prepares the application with some default values, and we can see here there's a configure logging section that out of the box is fetching a configuration from the app settings file, app settings because it's defined over here, but it's getting a configuration logging. Not just app settings, we talked about this in the last episode, so it can come from app settings, it can come from a database, it can come from environment variables, you name it. It can come from anywhere. What configure logging wants is to get the section logging from the configuration, whatever it is. And then it registers some providers: add console, debug, event source. There are others built-in providers. If we go to documentation on logging in ASP.NET Core, I think they're at providers. So console, debug, event source, this is the default. But there are others. I think there's around here somewhere. Configuration, blah blah blah. Okay, it's a bit buried somewhere around here, but there are, it's here. So console, debug, event log, Azure, trace, event source, and there are others. And we can build our own if we need to, but we'll see that later. Okay, build our own, we won't be doing it right now, but okay. So these are the default ones. That's why just by running the application we get all of this. There are these defaults. So let's use it to our advantage, this logging infrastructure. Adding to our application. So logging is already configured and added to the services, so we don't need to really register anything because it's already configured. So if we want to replace this with logs, what we can do is in the constructor we'll receive an iLogger of group service decorator, and then call it logger. Okay. Now we want to store it, and over here we'll use logger.logwarning, and pass the same string as we were using. So for now it's basically the same. Okay, now we have a error here because we need to pass this in. We are using out-of-fact. It will depend on the dependency injection container. If we were using the default one and not using this decorator stuff, we didn't need to do any of this. For instance, injecting the logger into a controller would just be do this, it's done. But because we are using this decorator over here, we need to pass it. So we use this context dot resolve and let me copy this here. Okay, now this is done. So if we go back to the application, I have .NET watch run working, so I change the files and it recompiles automatically. So we go back here and we can see now our warn for get all. So if I create a new one, we see the add, we see the get all because we are back to the page. We see another warn and a get by ID. So the same messages that we had, but now using logging. Let's continue with this. So one thing we can improve right now is, although it's not useful for these console logs we are seeing, we can do something. Instead of this string, we can do this. Instead of this, let's pass the argument here. Call it this. Why this? By doing this, we are basically, it's called structured logging. So it won't make a difference in the case of this console logging. We can fetch the warning is exactly the same. But if we were using something like Kibana or other providers where we send our information, besides sending the string, it will send a payload that will say decorated method equals this. Why is this important? Because if we want to do some filtering on our logs and stuff like that, we don't need to go all in regexes and parsing the logs. We can just go, for instance, if it goes as JSON, we can just check out those fields in the JSON file, and it's good for that, for filtering some things. In this case, this is just a string, but it could be a complex object. In that case, I'm not really sure, but I think if we wanted the complex object to be serialized like in JSON or something like that, we would pass like this. But in this case, we are in a basic environment, so this will do. But keep in mind, this is nice that with this we have a name. Normally we would put a 0 like in a string format, but by giving it a name, we can use this on depending on our target for the logs. In this case, I'm just in the console, so this is not really useful, but it's a good practice, so we'll do this. So I'll just copy and paste this everywhere. And I'll fix this. Go back here, it should recompile. Let's make a request. and it's there working as before. So the console stays the same, but other providers may take advantage of doing everything this way. Now, one thing you might notice, and maybe you're already protesting, is why am I using warning? Yeah, really, this isn't really a warning. This is just basically debug, trace. I'll go with trace because this is just development information. So no warning, just trace. So let's go here, recompiling. Okay, F5. Okay, but we don't see our trace in here. So that's because the default log level is above. I think it's info, not sure. So this trace will not be visible. So we need to override that. We'll do it by going into settings and changing it. So we have the settings and we have the development settings. So I'm going with the development settings, and I don't know this by heart. So let's go do some copying and pasting, not from Stack Overflow, but from the docs. So we have this here. Okay. So copy this. Okay. We'll save this for later. Okay, we have this. But as you see, the levels are higher. We can just go here. These levels depend on the namespace. So for default is debug, but for system is information, for Microsoft is information. So we can check out the namespace of our code. In this case, because I was creating this for dependency injection. Why did I do this? I can't remember. This probably shouldn't be this, but okay. So dependency injection. Okay. I copied from here. It's just to yeah, okay. I'll change this to, let me see here. You'll see. Okay, now is there an error here? Okay. So this is the namespace. So we can just grab this, go into settings, and we'll add and say log level is trace. So now we should see something. Okay, it's here, trace. If we go here, new one, enter, trace. And for instance, if we don't want to see all of this from Microsoft, we just bumped it up from 1. Let's go back. Okay, because I just changed the configuration, and like we talked about in the previous episode, if we use iOptions, it will reload the configuration. As we are not doing anything with this configuration, ASP.NET Core is handling it for us. They're using iOptions, so they're reloaded. So no need for the .NET Watch to change anything. So if we have 5, we start or not, we still get all of those. So let's, not what I was expecting, so let's try again. .NET Watch. Oh, an error. Configuration 1. Okay, it didn't work because I used the wrong. So it's probably warning. My bad. And now. What about now? Now it's dead. So .NET failed, but the watch doesn't watch the settings, so we can try again when the settings are correct. Okay. Okay, now it's working. So we make all those requests, and we don't see Microsoft stuff because we hid it. Sounds good so far. Now let's take a look at scopes. Scopes are a way to add information to our logging for every message that occurs in that scope. So let's go here to the documentation and get this part that we removed. So we are saying that in the console we want the scopes enabled. So if we go back, we see that now we have more information. This is because this extra information is added by ASP.NET Core. So every time we log, this information goes along with it. So a trace, a lot of information, and then the log we added. So how can we use logs ourselves? As we've seen, this is being used automatically by ASP.NET Core. So we can go here and do logger, using, because it's an disposable. Our scope equals logger dot begin scope. And to the begin scope we can pass some information we want to be there. So in this case I'll add a string and call it and now we okay. So now every time we log inside this scope, it will besides this information have this information. So let's see it. If we do a get, we now see created a new scope. In this case it appears to be separated by these arrows, and then ours decorator scope grew service decorator. So every time we log we can do something like this. Let's go back here, compiling. Okay, so we have hello from getAll, goodbye from getAll, and the scope in here. And every log that would be done, for instance, if inside this we add a log, it will log this as well because it's inside the scope. That's why we see the other scopes from ASP.NET Core. They're wrapping around these calls, so they're all added. So this is good for identifying the where we are doing something. Not really inside a class because we already have the class information with this, but to add information. For instance, ASP.NET Core is using this to add a connection, a request ID, the path of the request. So we could do this for these kinds of things that we want to be in every log in a certain scope, like the name implies. So I think this is the basics of logging. So I'm just going to stop this for now. Go back to the root. And I'm going to commit this as it is. And okay, this is done. Now let's take a look, like we did for dependency injection, let's take a look at using third-party providers for logging. So we have a lot of third-party possibilities. I think if we can go here, yeah, third-party. In the future, I will probably use Serilog because I want to try it out with Elasticsearch and that, but it's some episodes away still. We'll keep it simple right now and use one of the most used, I think, NLog. So let's get started with this. Let's head back to the application and we need to add a package. I already have the package ready here on my sheets. Let me just copy this. So this package adds integration with ASP.NET Core for logging with NLog. Okay, now let's get back here. So one thing right off the bat is that we don't need to touch any of this. This will use the same interface. The implementation will be different. Instead of being the Microsoft one, will be the NLog one. So we can just close this and start up. We can close this, close this, close this. We can keep this open. So what we'll do is, for starters, we go here and do use NLog. Okay, now we are using NLog. Another thing that we need to do is go to configure logging, because configure logging is already configuring some logging providers. We don't want them, we want to use NLog. So builder.clear providers. Okay, so we get rid of the providers that are added by default by ASP.NET in the create default builder, of course, and then use NLog. Now we need to configure NLog. One first thing that's kind of important is, because we are using NLog and it has its own configuration way of doing things, we have to delete this or we will be in trouble, because then Microsoft will use some of these configurations, then we'll use some of the NLogs, and it will be a mess. So just remove it and do everything with NLog. I think it's better. So now we need to configure NLog. Normally NLog probably recommends to use like a config file, nlog config. Getting started maybe. If we go here, yeah, it says for us to create an nlog config file and do stuff. but because we are just starting here, and I don't want to be in more files and XML and stuff, we'll do it programmatically for now. So we're NLog, create method, what? Yeah. Create NLog, and let's just do for now. We'll just go with programmatic. So programmatic, I've seen this before, but we can go here and yeah, we need to do this stuff. So let me remove this, and so we need to instantiate the config. And then, so we'll use a console target, and NLog has several targets, I think they talked about. So targets, files, event log, emails, console, ASP.NET Core logging. So we'll go with colored. Colored is better. Name. Then we add more stuff. So I'll copy this from my sheets. But basically we need to define, okay, it probably has a default one, so but with this we define the format of the messages. So let's go here. We can add more targets, but for now let's stick to one. Config that add target, console target. In the end, we need to set the log manager configuration to this. So it's a static property. So we set it and it's done. Now, what else do we need? Let's run it a bit and check how it's working. Okay, so we are not seeing anything. Why? Maybe the log levels? Let's try to configure that. So we can do config.add rule. So we'll say that we want a minimum log level and the maximum log level. To console target. Will this work? Okay, now we have logs. It's kind of different, but we have our infos. So we have just info. We want our things to go by, so we need to have something more. So we want for our namespace, for this namespace, we want it to be trace debug. So trace and debug for this namespace. We need this here. It's a bit different, but we need to use the star to say that anything in this namespace. So let's try again. We still don't see anything. Why? Let's try one thing. If we go here, where do I want to go? Here. Let's put info. Okay, now it works. But so even though we have this here, it's still not working. Why? Now this one is a tricky one, but I already had this problem, so I won't be wasting your time. So if we go to builder dot, what's the name? Set minimum level, yeah. We can say that the minimum level is trace. Why? Because let's add some comments. And in here, basically, because the ASP.NET part of things, I don't know how it's developed, but because the ASP.NET part of things has a default log level that is not trace, it isn't even reaching the NLog. So by leaving this trace, then NLog will filter how it wants. So if we go here, now we see trace. Okay, nice. One thing I didn't mention is, for instance, if we wanted to say for this one trace and fatal, from trace to fatal, what would happen is, okay, nothing. Then I had a stupid error before. When I was playing around with it, it would log 2 times, but probably was something I was doing wrong. So we can leave it here and say, in this case, for all log levels, from trace to fatal, which is all, this namespace can go, and info to fatal. So this here that is not very readable are the traces. These are the infos. So what can we do next? Now that we're using NLog, we can add a target to a file that we can't in the built-in provider, I think. So let's get to it. Just before that, I've remembered I didn't talk about this. So these dollars brackets, it's variables that are provided by NLog, and we can use them in here. So the date is provided, we can use some format. There's the level, the message, the exception, and there are others that are probably, we can probably see here. don't know the name, so dollar. Change the keyboard layout. There's all of this stuff and more. These are some examples, but you can check out that in the other places. Let's get back to it. So yeah, these are variables that we can use and change the order, add more, add less, and configure the layout depending on what we want for each target. So now let's create a file target. So our file target equals new file target. Call it file, because why not? Then we need to so we need to do a file name, and we have a variable for the base directory, and then the file name, which I will call file.log. Okay, I'm not going into that right now, but we probably here we have some role. I don't remember the name in NLog, but basically what I'm talking about is like when the file gets too big, we can archive it and get to a new one. Or if in every day we create a new file, so we have a file per day, we can do rolling, which is like if we have 5 log files, on the 6th we delete the first one, and we always have at most 5, stuff like that. But for now we'll just go with the basics of this. So then we can do file layout. What's the name? Layout. I'll use the same here. I'll just add one thing, that is, if I'm not mistaken, NDLC. So this is for logging the scope information, as we saw before, the scope information, but if you notice here we have no scope information. So now that we are configuring the file, let's use this, if I'm not mistaken. So let's add this config.add target file target. Okay. And let's add a rule. So the file target, but in this case we just don't warn. So to the file only important stuff goes, to the console everything, so we can see it. So let's see. Let's go back to the application. Let me just take the dock out of here. So let's go here to the application. The console is working as normal. If we go here, now if we go into bin debug, we don't have a file there because it doesn't exist yet. Why? Because we added it at warning, the minimum level to warning, but we have no warnings. So maybe I'll go here and the get by ID will have a warning, because why not? File changed. Okay, so this still, the file still doesn't exist. But if we go here, create new one, still nothing. But now we'll click here, and there's the file.log. So if we tell, there it is, our warning with the scope information, so connection, request ID, request path, the same as we saw before for ASP.NET Core. Of course, because I put warning on this one, we don't have this scope, but sure. So we are making the tail on the log, so every time I refresh, we get this here on the file. And over here, there's this warning. We go back here. The other are traces. And nothing happens here until we click this. So yeah, I think that's it. So these are the basics of using a third party. In this case I used NLog, but there are others. And like I said, probably this should be in a config file. I just went with programmatic because why not? And yeah, that's about it. Any doubts, be sure to let me know. And yeah, thanks for stopping by. Hope to see you in the next one. See yous.